What's up everyone, Kaze no What If is here with What If a Soul was transferred into Coby's body. Before we start, if you like the video, like it, share with your friends, comment, and let's start the video. I've gone back to address why only Coby was captured by Kuma, Lola's crew, and her abandoning of her friends. I had already thought of the first and last point, but typing so much and so fast, they remained stuck in my head instead of finding their way onto the keyboard. Thank everyone for pointing those inconsistencies out. And to the few that PM'd me, yeah, Luffy changing course means that Kami gets either eaten by a Sea King or sold into slavery. I can't really justify the plot bringing the crew to her rescue, especially with Sanji's picture actually on his bounty poster, which cuts away from the story those guys on flying fishes. And I actually remembered Lucci being a cheetah, and that it was that reason why he was fast enough to keep up and challenge Luffy. I'll correct that soon enough. Thank you all for pointing out that he was a leopard man. In this version of the story, Iceberg didn't participate into the creation of the new ship, so Thousand Sunny is out. I'm really shit with names though, so, as soon as a good one is offered in the reviews, I'll go back and correct it in the previous chapters. Shadows of Hell. During his life, Bentham had done much, and known more, than many other people. He cared little for that which seemed to push others, although, it maybe was because they all were too mellow to burst out beyond the limitations of their bodies, beyond the categories that their birth put them in. Bentham, once Bone-chan, was an Okama, and proud of it. Once Mr. 2, the user of the copy fruit, had found paradise in hell, and an angel in the form of Ivankov, the infamous manly queen of an entire realm of people brave enough to be themselves in spite of the circumstances. Back in Alabasta, he had made friends in the most unexpected of ways, and he had gladly sacrificed himself for their sake, protecting their beautiful ship while he was at it. Even as he walked towards his unavoidable capture, Bentham's heart had been light, and while he wept for the fact that he wouldn't see his friends again, he had also laughed in face of the adversity. That was just the Okama way. When the reports told of a pink-haired young man laughing his way through the cold and the wolves in the 5th level of Impel Down, also known as the Frozen Hell, Bentham's heart had stuttered. Quickly, a retrieval team was mounted, and now Coby was eating and drinking warmth while telling a story. Someone would have thought that the first thing out of his mouth would have been explaining how he got captured, but besides saying that the Straw Hat Pirates were all well and free, he had instead turned with shining eyes towards the man who had once been Mr. 2, "Want to know about the Going Merry, the ship you sailed to safety?" And what a story it had been. Ivankov herself, in his kingly splendor, had started a celebratory party for such an incredible tale, only for the pink-haired pirate to drop other news when he was proposed by some of the Okama who had listened with rapt attention. "Sorry, I'm married." That had been cause for another round of celebrations, while Coby finished recovering for the deadly cold of the frozen hell. And during each moment, it seemed that there was absolutely no sadness or despair about being a prisoner in Impel Down. There was no trepidation about what he needed to do, and after the celebrations, the Straw Hat Pirate's first mate ended up in a meeting with Ivankov himself. Inajima as a trusted advisor, and Bentham, because he had vouched for the pink-haired maverick. And if his telling of previous tales during the party that saw his crew sail into the sky, raid an ice lobby, and defeat another of the 7 Knights of the Sea hadn't shown how silver-tongued he could be, what he said later all but nailed that impression into stone. Are you planning of spending here the rest of your lives? The question, provocatory as it was delivered with a straight face. If the answer was yes, Bentham knew that Coby would begin his own plans. If the answer was no, then some insane adventure promised to take place soon. And the Okama who had once been Mr. 2 knew that he wanted to be a part of it. No matter how insane, or how utterly impossible sounding, Bentham only heard a friend asking for help. And he would deliver that help. That was just the Okama way as Bentham understood it. Having a devil fruit was utterly unexplainable to those without having eaten one themselves. I sure as hell knew that I would have been unable to explain what I felt and perceived since eating Moria's fruit to my past self, never mind an entirely different person. I had somewhat hoped that Enel's fruit would reincarnate somewhere that gave me access to it, and when that hadn't happened, I had been disappointed. Oh, the things I could do with a Logia, the kind of physics I could leverage with minimal effort. Still, crying about it wouldn't have helped. And the Mary's debacle had taken priority in my mind. Managing to avoid both the Foxy Pirates and Aokiji by having Usopp deliver us directly to Water 7 had been a blessing in truth, and once we began sailing on our new ship, I was left seeking out a way to both help Luffy with Ace's situation, swing Marineford's incoming war to our advantage, and figure out a way for me to become strong enough to earn my position as a first mate, fast enough for it to be useful. The 6 powers had been a start, but there was a reason why the strongest people around, save for Garp and Shanks, were devil fruit users. The advantages that kind of power could bring were just too vast to be ignored only for fear of drowning. I'd simply have to rely on Sanji, Zoro, Frankie, Nami, and now Lola in case I ever fell overboard. When the possibilities were a giraffe Zoan, the bomb fruit, and the soap thing that Khalifa would have eaten in another life, hoping for Moria's fruit had been the only sensible option. Still, it took some time and liquid courage to take a bite of that, and even more self-control to not rely on that power when it came to fight Kuma. Even without actively training it, I had been thinking about ways to use the power I now held to maximum effect. I wanted to jailbreak it. I needed a consistent, quick way to cheat myself into power, something that wouldn't leave me high and dry at the worst possible moment, and as Moria had so quickly demonstrated with his failure against a bunch of rookies, it sure as hell meant relying on quality more than quantity. The Shadow fruit was said to make Moria a ruler of shadows, instead of a shadow man. The fruit I partook of granted the user the ability to manifest and control shadows of living creatures, including their own, as physical and tangible forms, but why would I limit myself to that instead of using even the shadows of objects? After all, almost everything cast a shadow, and those things were now mine. Tapping into that power wasn't quite like turning up a switch, it was more like opening a second set of eyes, tasting with another tongue, feeling with another pair of hands, and so on, and each of those senses spread in a world that wasn't the one my body's inhabited, but one that was made of forgotten corners, of whispers, of quiet. My shadow was myself, moving freely when I didn't actively will it to do something else, and as it was the reflection, the impression of what I was, the shape I cast on the ground was just as eager to grow mightier as I was. Which was good, as I didn't know how I would have ended up dealing with the rebellious power. Doflamingo had shown that the awakening of one's devil fruit would truly push the user into a wholly new ballpark, as far as power went, and while even I wasn't so stupid as to believe myself capable of needing only days to turn my power into something that required years to dedicated study, I did love speculating about the potential uses of powers. Makita and Usopp could attest to it in the first person. Besides the wonders of it, there was just some deep satisfaction at having constantly new solutions and combinations come to life only because I had the imagination, and those I helped the will to obtain the needed finesse. My shadow wasn't my power, the fact that it could move separately from me and I could switch places with parts of it or the whole was merely the most obvious manifestation of the devil fruit I ate. It was something that I did take advantage of while fighting my way through the frozen hellscape that saw me hunted by truly rabid, hungry wolves, but it was nothing, compared to what I could do, and even less when compared to what I would eventually be able to do. I had kept my power quiet during the celebration that was thrown for my arrival thanks to Bentham immediately identifying me, but my shadow knew the importance of being sneaky, and it merely began to listen, to coax whispers and answers out of the shadows surrounding us, passing me slips of impressions and colors of ideas that I was growing accustomed to deciphering. So when I asked, "Are you planning of spending here the rest of your lives?" I knew that the laughter I was invested with was born out of irritation more than anything else, and I listened attentively when Ivankov spoke. the guards, Magellan, the warships waiting outside, the gates of justice, the current that will bring us straight to Marineford, where we'll either be sunk or left trapped into a triangle that will eventually starve us to death. When the opportunity arises, we'll consider it, otherwise, it will be a meaningless waste of lives. Instead of seeing that list of difficulties as an insurmountable wall, I merely envisioned it as a ladder. The guards were a joke easily taken care of by freeing enough other prisoners, the warships could be sabotaged, or quietly taken over. The series of gates of justice was a problem. But Impel Down was sure to host a slew of shipwrights and engineers, enough of them that someone like me could combine their knowledge, and maybe build an engine to sail through the calm belt. Magellan, my shadow rippled with determination, unnoticed by anyone but me, and I barely held back a smirk. How could venom harm a shadow? Of course, freeing Ace would probably deliver a lot of firepower, enough to keep an air balloon working indefinitely while I flew us away. Only for it all to come falling apart when the world government sent Kizaru to blast us out of the sky at the speed of light. I didn't mention it, but the best chance at escape was likely to be a revolt following Ace's being delivered to the Marines, which meant escaping Impel Down only to go to war at Marineford. This meant that shopping for skills and strengths was my first task. We'll need to keep the preparations quiet. I mused out loud, plans shifting in my head while my shadow eagerly lapped at my feet, as if waves on a shore. Don't talk as if we have agreed to anything, punk. Ivankov replied while downing a chalice of red wine. I told you, as things are now, it's impossible. I am here because I pissed on the flag of the world government, I learned some of the Chipperpole secret techniques, and killed Moria. My shadow decided that it had played a silent part long enough, and a doppelganger made of black shades with a faint hint of purple rose from the floor. Leaning on my shoulder with an elbow while casually waving at the other people present. You're hardly the first devil fruit eater to believe their power great enough to challenge the world. Inajima was hardly impressed, while my shadow had begun to play rock, paper, and scissors with Bentham, who seemed delighted. Still, my shadow informed me that there was a faint taste of surprise in the revolutionaries' two-dimensional counterparts. The prisoners will be the army needed to take over warships and to defeat the mooks that oppose us. I shrugged, and thanks to Bentham, I think we can noticeably up the threat level of those you trust. Me. The Okama in question was surprised to the point that he stopped playing. What do you mean, Pinky-kun? You've been using your devil fruit like it's a Zoan, but it's a paramecia. I grinned. The only thing I saw you do were copying the faces and mannerisms of some people, but why didn't you copy yourself? Have you ever tried to copy another's technique? Ryan Keku would work well with your style if I remember it right. Or have you tried to create copies of guns? Hell, have you ever tried to copy a knife while throwing it? While I spoke, my shadow stretched on the nearest wall and began to mimic what I was talking about. If we manage to jailbreak you power enough, maybe you can even impart copies of certain skills on chosen people, or mismatch willingly a copy and create something entirely new, who knows? With every suggestion, Bentham's jaw lowered towards the floor, while Ivankov, despite himself, rose an eyebrow. What are you, some devil fruit savant? Any idea of how the security system works here? My grin stretched wider, but I ignored the question. The answer would be something that Ivankov had to reach on her own after seeing me operate. Transponder snails visually linked to a bigger one in the security room, which projects everything it's witnessed in the first 4 and the 6th level. Inajima's glasses is the eyes of the power user, but I could tell that curiosity was rising there without my shadow's informative nudge. Shadows are mine to command. If Moria could pull shadows from the people that cast them, using the animals casting those as a puppet should be doable, if nothing else. My doppelganger could take over the lesser shadow and puppeteer it if some odd interaction happened between one specific shadows and its originator. Animals have less complex wills than humans, so it should be easy to take it over and have the snail show only what we want to be shown. Should. Give me a break, I had this power for like 2 days. I shrugged, waited for a second, and then added, and I was drunk during most of them. Before the two revolutionaries and Bentham could work through the hilarity and disbelief that my words had caused, I went on, also, you're probably thinking of spending months taking over, and seizing our chance at some point. It's going to happen in weeks, not months. Weeks. Ivankov gave a girlish screech. Ye have. Only to flip the script completely, you have brass one, I admitted, but the sheer amount of coordination it'd require. If you don't have plans and a hierarchy ready, it will be a bigger waste of lives than it's already shaping up to be. I shrugged, not really caring about people I never met, but our chance is coming in weeks, not months. I had awoken already in the 5th level of Impel Down. My clothes swapped for prison garbs, and my glasses left only as a spite to let me see my incoming doom. I didn't know how much time had passed between my encounter with Kuma and my awakening, but knowing how fast he could move, I wagered it had been at most a few days. Why are you insisting on weeks, Pinky Kun? Bentham's serious question made me bark out a peal of laughter. You should know, my captain is Monkey D. Luffy. I shook my head while ignoring Ivankov's spluttering, and he knows I'm here, he's coming for me. He'll come here sneaking under Hancock's dress to free his brother, and there will be no need for him to face Magellan if the prison is ready to sail away at his arrival. As much as I'd love to take out their security first, I'd rather have a peek at level 6 inmates. I rose from my seat and began to leave the room. They'll be our best chance at escaping successfully in any case. And I'm murdering Blackbeard's crew while they're defenseless in their cells before he can bust them out. I need a blade of some sorts, maybe two. I've yet to figure out how to use that. A shadowy hand landed on my shoulder while Bentham rose from his seat to follow me, and my attention fell onto my doppelganger, which was showing off its free hand. I felt as it tensed its incorporeal muscles, to the point it dully hurt. As there weren't bones or tendons being compressed or stretched to the limit, and I saw its fingers harden in sharp claws. My shadow can use Tekai. I noted, that's cool. My other self gave a silent laugh while grabbing its midsection, as if it feared busting its gut because of the exhilarating hilarity of the situation. And I couldn't help but feel the same way. The die was cast, and my climb to power could truly begin. The environment was dimly lit, fit only to allow the prisoners to always know that they stood behind bars, and it would lighten only in presence of Magellan or another distinguished visitor. The one with the faculty to travel to level 6, and beat up the bound prisoners didn't need any more light than the one it was provided. Its senses were unnaturally sharp, and instinct guided the being where the harsh training of city didn't directly command it. That instinct was the result of a very specific event, one that brought the animalistic pursuit of survival to subsume the human's need for reassurance about the individual's superiority. So, as he had not been summoned and it had not been commanded otherwise by the mistress, the Minotaur of Impel Down dragged its spiked club behind it as it wandered aimlessly, seeking vindication of its strength by beating up those that couldn't match up to his might. Because of shackles or because they were weak, it mattered not. He wore striped pants, a leather belt with a bronze hoof-shaped belt buckle, and no shirt. Its eyes were small and beady, and its brain completely swallowed by animalistic pushes, far away from what had once counted as human. When an opponent manifested itself out of the deepest shadows that ruled the entirety of level 6 of Impel Down, the awakened Zoan didn't hesitate, and it charged. Its opponent was a much smaller being, a puny, irrelevant speck of purplish black that wavered in and out of the creature's guard, folding on itself unpredictably only to lay blows that didn't manage to do any real damage. Until suddenly, there was the sound of a knife shearing paper, and the Minotaur collapsed. Clad in shadows against one of the walls interposed among the sea stone bars, was Coby, a short wakizashi in his hand and a humongous, struggling shadow in his other. The first instinct was to eat it, but the pink-haired pirate refrained. He was going to have his hands full in a minute. Your blows didn't harm it. The voice was quiet as a shadow, but the pink-haired pirate's doppelganger heard perfectly, and sharing its caster's propensity for clever solutions, immediately understood what he was getting at. With trepidation easy to see in its rippling shape, Coby's shadow grabbed the Minotaur's, and with a motion that wasn't disgusting only because it happened in 2 dimensions, gobbled it up. The doppelganger visibly chewed on it for a couple of seconds, only to swallow it full. Immediately, its shape grew while maintaining the original proportions, and it stretched to the Minotaur's height and bulk while letting out a silent bout of laughter. Quiet and fast as only shadows could be, the doppelganger attacked Coby. The punch stopped as it traveled towards the pink-haired pirate, who rose an unimpressed eyebrow, only to keep talking in a tone that was less than a whisper. "I don't know if that's my own idea of a joke, or if the Minotaur's shadow is messing you up." With an eerie smile, Coby's shadow shrugged, opening its hands as if saying who knows. But it was enough for the Straw Hat Pirate's first mate, who snorted, "Yeah, I figured. Wow, I must be a crazy cunt to play pranks on myself while in an enemy's stronghold." Not far behind, Bentham was similarly clad in shadows under the other pirate's control, and he was undecided between joining him in his laughter, or letting himself feel the dread that he felt in seeing how much was resting on the shoulders of a man that literally bickered with his own shadow. A violent crack echoed off the broken stone floor where Coby's shadow had kicked it, only to fold onto itself and return to its original size, repeating the motion, which produced the same effect. So you can do both shock and awe and quiet takeovers. Then the doppelganger grabbed the spiked mace of the Minotaur and easily hefted it over one shoulder, its face opening in a half-moon-shaped hole that was meant to be a smile, and the pink-haired pirate snorted, "You're just full of surprises, aren't you?" As if to mock its owner, the shadow made a show of lifting one edge of the part of it that was cast by Coby's jacket, one of the clothes that the Okama had been happy to give him instead of his prison garments, only to stuff the weapon inside. The pink-haired pirate grunted, his weight shifting momentarily until he adjusted. "I feel the weight of the things you take, don't clutter my shadow with useless stuff." Suitably admonished, the shadow returned to stroll by Coby's side as they walked past the cells, meeting the dangerous eyes inside without flinching, until they found one cage with a single owner. "You Shiryu of the Rain? Who wants to know?" The answer came in a bland tone, but the shadow of the man wasn't as nearly as quiet as it freely spoke of its thirst for blood, of its eagerness for slaughter. Coby was utterly nonplussed as he spoke in the dim lights of the 6th level of Impel Down, knowing that the Minotaur was going to awaken sooner rather than later, and that he and Bentham, who had volunteered to accompany him, would need to disappear before Magellan came looking for whatever had caused one of the awakened Zoans to drop unconscious. Let's just say that Magellan made enemies. In hindsight, maybe the prisoners should have simply avoided the Minotaur, but it was too big of an opportunity to discard, vast strength without a proper will to sustain it. Given the ease with which Coby's shadow had overtaken it, it wasn't in doubt that the other awakened Zoans would reach the same end. "Oh." The intrigued voice of one of the 3.5 meters tall man reached Coby as his figure came forward, his eyes keen and unforgiving as the edge of his blade. "And what do you hope to gain from being here?" "I'm putting together some like-minded people." The lie fell easily from the lips of the pink-haired pirate. "I can get you out. I ate the dark fruit, so I need you to step closer to the bars." "And what do you hope to obtain by getting me out?" The most dangerous guard of Impel Down asked sardonically. "I wouldn't be here if I could take on Magellan. I need some strong people to keep away the riffraff while I deal with that cunt." Coby shrugged. "Are you in or not?" "Frankly, it doesn't look like you have anything better to do." All the while, his shadow had been whispering reassurance, singing the same instinctive thirst for blood that characterized the soul of the tall swordsman, and maybe it was that subtle, minimal influence to push the other where he was needed. "True enough," Shiryu of the Rain replied, finally giving a smile that truly matched his personality. "I'll need my sword. I'll pass you an electrical torch. You need to angle it to cast your shadow outside your cell, so that my darkness can act as a bridge, the pink-haired pirate explained smoothly as he passed through the wide bars of the small object in question. There are some other things that could be useful where Reu is kept. You know her name. It was impossible to hide the interest in his voice, and also where it is. As I said, we're a group of like-minded people. The evil grin sported by the much smaller pirate seemed to stretch wider than it should have, and a Mito draws attention, especially one as beautiful as that. That she does. Shiryu could already feel the blood spurts splattering on the floors once he could hold his weapon once more, and followed Coby's instructions, lighting up the torch in order to cast his shadow beyond the bars. It will feel a little odd. Coby smiled dangerously, grasped the man's shadow, and cut it free from its rightful owner before the latter could truly understand what had happened. The sudden severing of the shadow made the tall swordsman fall unconscious, but the pink-haired pirate was already busy fending off the vicious, bloodthirsty thing that had been worked up into a frenzy thanks to Coby's own doppelganger. Well then, the pirate's shadow rose to help its owner wrangle into submission Shiryu's, and with a bit of finagling, it was balled up safely into Coby's closed fist. We'd better get back to Ivankov. I'm going to need a quiet place to bring this one under control. The room I had been closed in once Bentham and I made our way back to Ivankov was lit by one electrical light, and it had been barred shut from the outside, on my request, eyeing the still struggling form of Shiryu's shadow in my closed fist. I couldn't help but swallow nervously. It couldn't be helped. The swordsman was much older, much stronger, and much more dangerous than I was. His stealth and swordsmanship were off the charts, while I remembered him getting up after being blasted by Sengoku himself. In short, his overall might obviously dwarfed mine, and while I knew Moria had used Luffy's shadow in the manga despite the latter's uniquely great will, the Shichibukai had been older, experienced in the uses of his power, and had survived Kaido himself. In comparison, I was not particularly good at taking cheap shots. So, while Bentham had managed to tweak his own power to copy my Saru and Tekai, I still had no idea of the true limits of my power. And as he tried to make his own 2 of the 6 powers, only to then teach them to the others he trusted, I was going to make my own metamorphosis. I was going to make Shiryu's shadow mine. And I was going to do so completely, unlike the way in which eaten shadows would be spat out after heavy blows, because without the might that this choice of mine could give me, I'd die at Marineford. My heart hammered in my chest as violently as it did the first time I offered myself up as bait for a Sea King, relying on Luffy's luck to survive, but when there had been only elation and exhilarating expectation of success, now there was a twinge of uncertainty. If I failed, I died. I had no idea what could happen to me if Shiryu's shadow managed to overpower me, but it would hardly matter, as I remembered Zombie Luffy after he had eaten shadows to become strong enough to punch Or's junior ancestor. I was putting all of myself, my very soul, on the line, and there was only one acceptable outcome. If I didn't reach that, it wouldn't matter. My doppelganger squeezed one shoulder, and after one last deep breath, I ate Shiryu's shadow. It felt oddly like a liquid jello as it slid down my throat, and it immediately suffused my body. My bones strained, my muscles quivered, and my tendons screamed. Shiryu was a 3 meters and half tall man, powerfully built, while I was a regular-sized boy of 16 years of age. No matter how much I had trained and pushed my body, there was simply no comparison, and as I tried to contain that might, I howled in agony. I could feel myself tearing at the seams, too late remembering that maybe Luffy had been able to eat that many shadows because he was made of rubber, while Moria had that unique body of his, and decades of experience. Worse, I felt something other pushing me aside, singing of promised bloodshed and ashes and ruin, while my breaking down body moved as if to barrel through the barred door that kept me from the others. As if I didn't matter. As if I was nothing. That immediately gave me some ground to stay on. I didn't sail with Luffy to be cast aside as unimportant. I hadn't willingly risked my lifetime and time again to see my efforts vanish at the first challenge I faced without my captain's prodigious luck backing me up. I hadn't slaved away day and night to help those around me grow stronger, to save the merry, to cut away the enemies on our path before they could hurt them to be regarded as irrelevant. I had stuff to do, I couldn't be stopped here, this world had too much to offer, and I wouldn't be stopped by some secondary antagonist nobody cared about. I would heal under Ivankov's care from the destructive changes my body was undergoing, then, I'd keep readying myself, to all effects. My doppelganger was a Logia when fighting on his own, was he not? And he already had the might of an awakened Zoan to fall upon when needed. But Crocodile had pushed his fruit to the limits, did he not? With his techniques, my shadow could acquire years of mastery in a matter of hours, and there were also koala, rhino, and zebra-based awakened Zoans in Impel Down. Empty minds holding instinctive wills that I could take on easily, surely it'd be much easier than fighting against Cheerio's shadow. My doppelganger hadn't strained at all to gain the might of the Minotaur. But my body was positively breaking apart as I forced it to adapt to a power that I hadn't gained myself. Would eating an awakened Zoan's shadow tear it apart again? Surely, once I was done with the ongoing process, and healed by Ivankov, my vastly increased physicality could more easily subsume an awakened Zoan than my current body. It was only a matter of winning against Cheerio's shadow. And when I would, my body stopped moving despite my muscles breaking and my tendons tearing, the will of Cheerio's shadow slamming hopelessly against mine. I was the ruler of shadows, not him. I was the regular Joe that had managed the impossible, time and time again. Not him. But all of that didn't really matter to make my point. I metaphorically stared down the other that tried to take over, the shadow of a man that was little more than a butcher, the echo of a soul that did nothing besides dedicating his existence to cause pain and anguish. It wasn't I the meaningless one. It wasn't I to not matter. I am Charlotte Coby. The thought rang with crystalline clarity in my mind, and you shall kneel. A pressure that I hadn't realized had been building up erupted like a wave from me, a thunder with no sound, a hand squeezing another's into submission, and just like that, Cheerio's will was gone. Bentham's friend was a decidedly odd one, and not in the best ways, too sure of his role, of his place, of his worth. Unwilling to even entertain the idea of changing gender, Ivankov huffed in annoyance at the beautiful woman it would have made. In his male form, he even considered changing him for the hell of it, letting him discover the joys of his new sex with some cathartic marathon among the Okama, but she held back. And not only because he and Bentham were friends, not just anyone could celebrate with the Okama never showing even a hint of disgust or distaste for them. Not many would be so readily accepting of one reality not their own, and yet this Coby hadn't batted an eye. Then of course, there was the casual ease shown in offhandedly mentioning unique directions in which Bentham could push his development, fearlessly deciding to share some of the 6 powers, and immediately planning a takeover. Logically working through the hurdles that everyone knew were on the way, while doubling down everywhere he could as a measure to fight off any sudden snag. It was the mind of a strategist, wrapped in the young body of a kid that did its best to keep up with the might holed up inside. Listening to the kid, he had his power for less than a handful of days, and if Bentham's growth was any indication of the pink-haired pirate's understanding of powers, his own learning curve would be as close as vertical for a long while. Ivankov hadn't been told exactly every detail of Coby's power, which, given that the two didn't know each other, was only smart on the kid's part. But Kuma had shared much of what there was to know about the Shishibukai years before, and the Okama Queen had a good idea of what he had been planning. The potential backfire was great, but there was a single point that stopped the king of Kamabaka Kingdom from squeezing the boy like the gnat he was because he could turn into a dangerous chimera. My captain is Monkey D. Luffy. Pride oozed off his voice. A peacock fanned its feathery tail, a lion shook his mane, an artist wept at the results of his endless toil, and Coby felt that exact pride in being in the Straw Hat's crew. He's coming for me. Certainty filled the room, the sun rose from the east, there were 4 blues, the Tenryabito were cunts, and his captain was going to storm Impel Down for one of his. Which were the odds that a monkey D. Luffy would happen to be the Sprat's captain? How likely was it that there was no relation between this Straw Hat and Dragon, when there was such unwavering loyalty, and dared Ivankov say it? Faith. The answers were obvious, especially given the kind of unbound charisma Dragon summoned to his just cause. The king of Kamabaka Kingdom should know, he had felt that on his own skin. The boy had asked to be closed away from all others while he dealt with a particularly dangerous shadow, after showing Bentham 2 of the 6 powers. So you have something productive to do instead of worrying uselessly. As if he couldn't fathom why a friend would worry for him. Ivankov had seen some of that zealot-like determination before, and it wasn't hard to understand the entirety of the boy no, of the young man's character. He lived for his crew, that was all. Maybe it was that dedication that had pushed Kuma into manipulating the events to put the pink-haired pirate in level 5. Too much new information surrounded the newcomer, and too much context escaped the king of Kamabaka Kingdom. So, Coby had been allowed to do as he pleased, even if he had been placed into a room that could be flooded with seawater in the blink of an eye. Ivankov didn't know whose shadow had been taken from level 6, but there was a reason why its existence was kept secret from the rest of the world. Tortured screams echoed from behind the barred door for the better part of an hour, until there was a sudden quiet. It was the quiet of the suicidal before the jump, of the guillotine before being released, of the instant between the flash of a muzzle and the blow of the same gun. And then 9 of the Okama that had been at the ready fell unconscious as a conqueror's opened his eyes for the first time. Coby's wool exploded in a wave out of the closed-off room, and it made Ivankov blink in surprise. Oh my! What followed was perhaps predictable. The door was blown off its hinges by a shadow that moved too fast to be seen, only for the bloodied, bruised, battered form of the pink-haired pirate to walk out of where he had asked to be left alone. His skin was torn in places, while an enormous puddle of blood kept spreading from under his tentative, stumbling steps. As he left the room and entered the one where Ivankov had been waiting, his shadow followed him, and it stretched both along the walls and towards the ceiling, utterly dwarfing the size of the body that should have been casting it. Defying the presence of electrical lights with a defiant body language, and with it, came the receding, echoing effects of the conqueror's haki that had just awakened. Ebbing and flowing uncontrolled, it filled the room with the unending determination of seeing the world change to accommodate his wishes. Still too young and untrained, the ability didn't summon anything beyond a faint feel of danger and awe in those strong enough to resist it. And then Ivankov truly took in the emaciated form of Coby. He stood at 2 meters of height, with broad shoulders and torn limbs that instead of being gangly despite the muscle on them, like they had been before, now carried the power of an older physique. Body. The voice of the pirate sounded feeble when compared to his presence, but his gaze burned with certainty as it landed on the miracle worker. Can't keep up with power. A hand was slowly raised, only to jab a thumb towards an exposed stretch of muscle. Growth, healing. The words weren't slurred as much as munched out, as if Coby had chewed each letter before spitting them through his bloodied lips. But in face of that determination, Ivankov could only nod, quickly walking towards the apparently successful pirate, needles already popping out from under the fuchsia gloves. It will take several days for your body to adapt, but congratulations. You're in the hands of the best on the planet when it comes down to help foolish youngsters grow accustomed to their new bodies. His words were clearly wasted, as Coby lost consciousness as soon as he finished asking for what he needed, but remained standing, the dangerous presence of his shadow holding him up while radiating protective intent. This will be a fun story to tell, yeehaw. And Bentham. Given that Yamato decided he was a man with little build up to it, I thought that this was Oda taking the chance his editors undoubtedly stopped when Bentham was introduced. With all the friendship at stake during the arc of Alabasta, and the fundamental role he had in Impel Down, I remember that at the time I truly thought he'd be the character to join Luffy's crew from Impel Down. Still, I used him to introduce cobies being dropped in the 5th level, not only because going through all the previous ones sounded somewhat wasteful given that we all already know about them, but it is also justified because he's believed to not have a devil fruit and he had more than 300 million belly as a bounty. Also, his fruit is another that can be utterly devastating when cleverly used, and Coby does like finding out how to push devil fruits even further. Impel down. This was the cleverest, fastest way I thought of to have Coby both unlock his Conqueror's haki, for the same reason I had him eat a devil fruit instead of going forward without. It's just mandatory for a truly interesting MC in the One Piece world. And to have him grow up to Luffy's level in time for the War of the Best. I hope you enjoyed, let me know what you think of this. Chapter 15. I kind of corrected the 2 mentions of the new ship's name into Roaring Nova, and since it's such a minor detail, everyone is encouraged to make up their own preferred choice in their head. I'm not wasting any more time on it than I already have. I also corrected one of the mentions of a cheetah instead of a leopard in regards to Mary's power, but I'm sure I missed most of those mentions. I'll likely go over that chapter with a fine-toothed comb only after I finish the story. I'm not denying that I might be willing to write a second one that will instead focus on the new world, who knows. As always, my problem is that I have too many stories ongoing, even if this one is ridiculously easy to write. Impel is down. Consciousness returned to me with a ragged breath, accompanied by a dull pain throbbing through the entirety of my being. Coby. Bentham's voice was the first thing to greet my senses while I lurched up to a seated position, only for the evenly distributed pain across the entirety of my body to slowly fade back to a more distant thing. No, it wasn't that the pain had lessened, it was that as I breathed, my tolerance for it grew, until it was a distant thing. Bentham. I called to him while I opened my eyes, surprised to notice that despite the lack of glasses, I could see perfectly. Every shape was perfectly defined, every color had neat borders, depth and width of my vision didn't mix together in a nausea-inducing painting. I blinked furiously while I brought a bandaged hand to my face, only to stop when my attention fell onto the skin of my arm, almost chalky white. There was a littering of minute scars everywhere I could see. My shadow hopped up from where I was casting it and gave me a ridiculous thumbs up, immediately gesturing to its own height and shape, only to point back at me, a permanent change. I got the meaning of what it meant rather quickly, and I realized that my voice had grown deeper. I wasn't Chiryu's copy, more like a version of Coby that had pushed itself as hard as Zoro did for all of his life. While my Okama friend fluttered about me, I rose to my feet, noticed that the floor was at a greater distance from my face than what I had been thinking, and took a deep breath. I felt powerful. And I knew things, such as the likely position of Ivankov's little slice of home in relation to the rest of Impel Down, where the deposit with the prisoners' effects that were waiting to be delivered to Marineford were, how to reach the security room with the shortest route. Or the most sneaky one. I knew where Magellan's office was, and how to walk there. I knew that not counting the Minotaur, there were other 4 awakened Zoans in the prison, all under the command of a single woman, who had been instrumental in pushing those Zoan users into awakening their fruit in such a manner that they'd remain loyal to her. I knew how many Bulgari were around, where the kitchens were, where the medical bay was, and how to use Ryu, Shitai's Notaki. I'm fine, friend. I grinned at Bentham, who was weeping unashamedly at seeing me on my feet. Did you manage Saru and Tekai while I was busy? I knew so much about every nook and cranny of the prison that plans to take it over or break it apart fell readily into my thoughts, and I felt my hands itch with the need to take up a proper sword, or a cigar. I grimaced as I immediately noticed the small impulses that clearly weren't only mine, but I pushed them aside. I'd take Ryu once it was found, but only because not using my newly obtained skills to the best would render my self-imposed torture meaningless. I did, Coby-kun. Bentham proudly used Saru to flicker about the room, and my eyes kept up with his form rather easily, while I immediately realized that he would have been faster than I was before taking in Shiryu's shadow, and a few of the other practitioners of the Okama Kempo managed it. Even if I didn't manage to graft copies of this skill onto others. What about making copies of yourself to teach one-on-one? It's the best option to up the average level of those guys and gals only clad in oversized prison garbs that had been put on me while I was unconscious. I walked out of the small room I had been resting in, and took in the curious expression of Ivankov, who was in her female form while drinking a tall cup of red wine. I didn't have the time to try that just yet. Well, you'll have time now while I sneak to the security room and take over their system of transponder snails. I grinned unashamedly at the certainty in my voice. I could sneak with the unmatched stealth skills of Shiryu, I could improve on them thanks to my devil fruit's power. And I was strong enough to fight off even Magellan if everything went to hell. As if knowing my thoughts, my shadow fished the spiked club that once belonged to the Minotaur out of an invisible fold on its person, and I distractedly noticed the weight I had been carrying on myself lessening significantly. Still, it was like registering a change in pressure of a hand placed over a shoulder, rather than actually feeling a difference in the effort I needed to stay upright. So sure of yourself now, Pinky-kun. The female voice of Ivankov clashed horribly against my memory of her male form, but oddly enough, I found that both suited her well enough. I was sure of myself before, I shook my head, now I'm certain. For that matter, how long I been out? Almost 2 weeks, Pinky. Her teasing tone turned into the serious one of a medic talking with a patient, making sure your body would remain as solid as your power turned it into, without causing harm to your longevity took constant, skillful care. Everything you put into that growth came from you, but you didn't have enough nutrients to support such growth. To be frank, none could. But I am the miracle worker, and you completed your metamorphosis from cute and murderous into hunky and dangerous. Congratulations. 2 weeks. I had no true idea of the timeline going on, there was just too much of it ignored in the manga, but this could be problematic. You have a way to listen into the happenings of Impel Down, don't you? Being there for years, nobody would have been content by secluding themselves away from the events outside, especially given Ivankov's role in the Revolutionary Army, which all but demanded that he'd wait for an opportunity to escape. Has a Shichibukai come visiting perhaps? Luffy hadn't begun making a ruckus yet, but I couldn't exclude that he was already infiltrating the prison, and that killed completely whatever time for preparations that I had set aside. Jinbe himself has been added to level 6 several days ago. Ivankov raised an eyebrow, clearly interested in what my oddly specific question revealed about what I knew of the happenings outside the prison, and Magellan has just retrieved Fire Fist Ace, he's escorting him up as we talk. Boa Hancock didn't come visiting? I felt my mouth dry up as the full weight of the implication slammed into me. I had hardly interfered enough to stop Kuma's intervention in Sabaonde, did I? My actions had been bringing some minor differences along the way, but they had all been constricted, limited to the crew and its immediate surroundings. Ace is being moved now, I'm ridiculously behind in my preparations, and Luffy is nowhere to be found. It shouldn't be going like this, not unless actions could have unintended consequences, I knew that much. And underlining my situation there were the words I heard Kuma speak as he took me from Thriller Bark, Charlotte Coby. He had known my full name even when Lola hadn't revealed it. Worse, the bounty poster that he had read it off from had to be printed days before. Maybe even sooner than my marriage. With the current absence of Luffy, I was left considering a dreadful scenario. Either my existence and the interference it brought had caused someone among the Marines to access a devil fruit capable of making them see the future, or worse. I wasn't the only one placed in a body that wasn't theirs. Maybe someone got placed into Hell Meppo? The best path to power from there would be to await for Garp, and bust yourself training, but it still wouldn't justify Kuma knowing about Charlotte Coby. But if the enemy had someone capable of getting hints of the future, it made little sense to reveal their hand by writing my full name on a bounty poster. What are you thinking about, Pinky Man? The question from Ivankov made me raise my eyes towards her while I ran plans to escape the prison in the background. Is it possible that either the Marines or someone in the world government to have gained access to knowledge of events yet to happen? That question floored the king of Kamabaka, who raised both eyebrows, giving me an answer that I truly didn't want to hear. Everything is possible on the Grand Line. This is the second very odd question you made me, Coby. Don't you think I deserve an explanation, especially after all I did for you? The pouty shape that her lips took while her voluptuous body twisted a little made me grimace. I owed her, and I owed her a great deal, so a version of the truth would have to go. Since I've started sailing with Luffy, I've been able to get glimpses of some people we'd meet, of some situations. In a crystal ball I purchased in Loketown as a joke, it was close enough to the full truth that even without taking in my Shirio's enhanced ability to lie, spotting the bullshit I was spewing was extremely difficult. I could only see glimpses of one version of the future, one without me in it. The naked fascination on the Okama Queen was matched by the odd silence of Bentham, who had been following the conversation with wide eyes. This is a secret, so keep it for yourselves. It mattered relatively little even if the information got out, at this point of the game. The deck was already stacked for the most part, and there wouldn't be time to stop me from doing as I wished in Impel Down before the mess that was Marineford. I got married the same day on which I killed Moria, to an estranged daughter of Charlotte Leland. I rose a hand to forestall questions and blown out of proportions reactions when Ivankov's face began to enlarge unnaturally because of a comedic wish to use her powers to underline how flabbergasted she was. When Kuma captured me, 2 days later, he read my name off a bounty poster, calling me Charlotte Coby. Something that I knew thanks to my visions, something that my wife had yet to reveal, something that had to be printed before the wedding took place. And for a second, I got a peek into the mind that had earned a place of leadership amongst the ranks of the Revolutionary Army. For a single moment, I witnessed Ivankov casting aside misconceptions and doubts, working through the implications that had to be addressed immediately. It makes little sense to reveal such a frightening possibility for something as minor as having your full name before it's revealed on its own. This either means that you're the specific target of either this ability or its user, or that this hypothetical knowledge of the future is spotty and incomplete. As such, a name like Charlotte would grab a lot of attention, and with incomplete knowledge of the context, removing you from the board sounded like a necessary step. I blinked while I took a deep breath in my recently improved body, faintly marveling at how powerful it felt even for such a minor action. Ivankov's disassembly of the situation was formidable in its own right, but it achieved the result of calming me down. We need to act as soon as Ace's ship to Marineford passes the gates of justice. It doesn't matter, does it? The only thing I can do, is to prepare to the best of my possibilities, with everything I have, for every situation that will come to mind. It was towards the naked curiosity and trepidation of Bentham that I turned my focus next. Escaping Impel Down is doable. Surviving Marineford with only our forces, it's not. Ace is one of Whitebeard's sons. It means that he's coming, and that he'll bring all his family to save Fire Fist. Reaching the Marines' headquarters under the shadow of the strongest man in the world is the best chance that we're going to get. Ignoring how each word I spoke landed with the weight of a cannonball, I began to walk towards the exit. While Magellan is busy, I'll take control of security and communications. Complete your preparations, because we're escaping our prison to go to war. Why would you want to take part in that mess? Ivankov's startled question made me grin from over my shoulder. Haven't I told you? My shadow gave out another silent laughter, melting again into 2 dimensions as it pooled at my feet. Ace is Luffy's older brother, which means my captain will go alone against the world if it means having a chance to help Fire Fist. I'm the first mate. It's my precise duty to raise him an army if that is what it takes to accomplish his goals. I let out a burst of loud, booming laughter as I started to jog out of the Okama's small slice of paradise in hell. I was just lucky to be in a place with thousands of willing recruits, and several hundreds of unwilling shadows that I could use to animate those that would oppose me. I was preparing for war, and even if Luffy was late, or if he wasn't coming at all, it simply meant that it fell on my shoulders to rescue his foolish older brother. The roaring Nova tore through the waves as it left behind the smoking rubble that had been an ice lobby still in the process of being repaired after Oimo and Kashi rampage. The Jolly Roger of the Straw Hat Pirates flying proudly over the tallest mast while the trio of trees swayed eagerly in the wind, the rustle of leaves singing beautifully against the ever-present rumble of the sea. Usopp finished chewing the slimy mess that Robin had made available to him, pushing his powers once more into a new, exhilarating direction, to finally spit out a transponder snail unlike any ever seen on the seas, golden and black, with streaks of white running through its entirety. The snail was the size of Lola's head and Brook's afro held next to each other, had a small copy of a straw hat on its shell, and four eye stalks swaying gently over its mouth. Robin had pointed out how useful it'd be to be able to get a look into Impel Down before actually reaching it, and she had delivered to Usopp a golden, small transponder snail that was clearly meant to be kept on a wrist. Capable of calling with absolute authority an admiral-led strike force of warships, a black counterpart that was meant to intercept ongoing communications, and one of the transponder snails that had been acquired on Water 7 before the first raid on an ice lobby. Of course, since she couldn't do anything but her best to provide the best opportunities to rescue the first mate, she had also squirreled away the extremely unique, fat-looking, white transponder snail. Listening to her, it was extremely rare, and apparently had been placed into the rebuilding base only for fear that the Revolutionary Army would try and take advantage of the situation now that the CP9 had been torn apart. The news had reached the Straw Hat Pirates just before the Roaring Nova came into view of the Marine stronghold. With the pirates' bounties, which elicited a multitude of reactions, along with Lola's confused confession about her mother at not seeing her own surname on her poster while her husband had it already printed under his picture, came the news about Fire Fist Ace. That had hardly lit a fire under the pirates' asses, as they were already incensed and roaring to go against any on their path after almost 2 weeks spent sailing and training themselves to the best of their abilities. But it hadn't helped the Marines on duty, who were hardly expecting another raid before the rebuilding could be completed, never mind from the same crew. The Roaring Nova had almost openly mocked the warships stationed at an ice lobby, faster, more maneuverable, with firepower as varied and dangerous as the crew itself. There had hardly been any confrontation. Under the expert indications of Nami, the precise sniping of Usopp, and the powerful weapons built with Frankie, 3 Marines warships had been taken apart, while the rest of the crew broke the multitudes of soldiers on the island proper, progressing at a constant pace through the enemies that vastly outnumbered them. Makita had taken to throwing baseball-sized, sharp-edged projectiles of Usopp metal provided by the sniper, their weight negligible until they left the tip of her fingers, becoming several tons of destructive power that tore through buildings, people, and ships with the ease a bullet would tear through a sheet of paper. Robin manifested interlocked limbs that produced a giant version of her arms or legs, which swept the ground of the mooks while Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji could take down the stronger opponents that had been placed to protect an ice lobby until new agents could take the place of the decimated CP9. Lola, with her sabers capable of changing size, had been batting away those cannonballs that threatened to hit the Roaring Nova, while Mary practiced her Tekai while jumping around in Jeppo to strike back the heavy balls of lead. Brook had been quick to make his music seep into their enemies, distracting them only to quickly cut down those fools that managed to attempt to jump onto the ship's deck, while Chopper played fiddle among everyone, his shapes changing based on what he needed to do. The Straw Hats couldn't allow the enemies to pursue them into the triangle formed by an ice lobby, Impel Down, and Marine Ford, so they stormed the place, destroying the enemy's ability to retaliate. While they were at it, Robin stole once again everything of value, which didn't limit itself to scores of food to replenish the Roaring Nova's hull, but that extended to Jabber's wolf fruit, which they had missed the first time they raided the Marine stronghold. Coupled with a large amount of money present in the office of the new officer in command of the area, as he had to pay the workers alongside the Marines on base. If not for the urgency of the situation, Nami might have swooned at the resounding success. While Usopp couldn't help but notice that maybe it was Robin the one more deserving of the title of thief. Usopp pointed two of the eyes of his newly created transponder snail towards the lucid white cloth he had prepared beforehand, and clicked the button that enabled the black part of his masterpiece to ride over the absolute authority of the golden side. Soon, images began to flash on the predisposed screen, the sniper flicking through them as he sought an inkling of what they were dealing with. So of course, when the image on the screen depicted a bigger, meaner version of Coby standing among unconscious, at least Usopp hoped they were unconscious, uniform-clad people, he squawked in surprise, calling onto the situation the attention of everyone. "Is that Coby? I heard that prison changes people, but this is ridiculous." Makita's snort of laughter rang in opposition of Lola's swooning. "Oh, my love, what have they done to you?" "Call him," Usopp uncharacteristically. Luffy's serious voice was quick to break through the chaos that their first mate's look and apparent situation instilled in the crew. In hindsight, expecting him to remain in his cell didn't make much sense. Sanji was the last to comment while he lit a cigarette, only for the 2 meters tall Coby to frown towards the transponder snail that was suddenly ringing in the room he was in. With a movement too fast and smooth to be believable, a shadow was snapped up from the ground and forced into one of the people that were laying at his feet, and while the Straw Hat Pirates couldn't hear, as the snail on the other side hadn't picked up, the gist of what the pink-haired pirate wanted was clear. So the guard answered with a proper and on-point tone, "This is Impel Down's communication station, who is talking?" "I am Monkey D. Luffy." The captain immediately snatched the transponder from Usopp's hands, his brain likely not picking up on the nuances of the situation. "I'm going to be Pirate King. Pass me Coby, we're coming to rescue him and my brother." His shout rang so loud that everyone witnessed the pink-haired pirate on the other end of the line raised his eyebrows while his jaw hung low, as if about to fall, only for him to throw his head back and let out a booming burst of laughter. His hand covering his eyes as he walked towards the transponder snail and pick up, a wide smile opening on his face as he answered, "Coby here, Captain, what's up?" "We're coming to rescue you and Ace." Luffy shouted back, "But you need to plan what to do after that." If possible, Coby's eyebrows climbed even higher on his forehead, while his shadow rose from behind him and hunched forward with silent interest. "I was working on that already." "Wait, who's we?" "Don't be stupid." The captain replied, "We is us, dumbass. Now, make the plans, and let us rescue you and Ace." His orders relayed, Luffy tossed the transponder back to Usopp and returned to his favorite spot on the roaring Nova, staring ahead with determination, while Coby tried to parse through the veritable cannonball that had just been dropped at his feet. "We is us. Wait, everyone is coming here." Something like outrage flashed on the more rugged version of Coby's face, and before people could begin making a mess for who had to talk into the transponder snail, Robin picked it up. "We've just stormed through an ice lobby, we don't know how far we are. But if you could figure out how to open the gates, we'd arrive amidst the 5 warships guarding the prison." Coby cut through, "It should take 2 hours for you to arrive." It was odd that he'd know that specific bit of information with such certainty, but Robin didn't question him. He'd surely proven that there was some truth to his claims of being able to use his crystal ball. "I have good news and bad news, preferences." "The good first." Usopp tapped another button on the unique transponder snail that the Straw Hat Pirates could now enjoy. "I'll need the good ones to prepare for the bad ones." "Okay, first, as you can see, I escaped my cell." He grinned at everyone, even if there was an unnamed tension in the corner of his eyes. "Second, do you remember Mr. 2? He's free as well. Third, I think that as I am now, or as I will be by the time you reach me, I'll be able to take on all of you put together, which effectively doubles our firepower. Fourth, by the time you arrive, I'll have an army ready to go. The unholy grin on his face mirrored the sluggish bloodlust that was always easy to awaken in the swordsman, who walked next to Usopp. An army? Zoro's sleepy voice was the first to cut the tense silence that those words had summoned. Why would you need to prepare an army, Coby? And what happened to you? Wait, you can see me? The pink-haired pirate was quick to catch on the implications. This is not a visual transponder, snail. Wait, Usopp merged stuff that makes the impossible a cakewalk, didn't he? The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and off to the side, the sniper smiled widely, unashamedly. There was a powerful feeling to be praised for deeds that had been accomplished with no embellishments on his parts, a heady feeling that was barely held back by the seriousness of the situation. We can. Zoro cut off the replies of everyone. About you and that army? Coby rolled his eyes. My devil fruit can be used to cheat massively, and it's what I did as soon as I could. It landed me in a coma, and I just awoke. About that army, yeah, those would be the bad news. Magellan entered his office with a tired grunt leaving his lips, the stress of moving a prisoner from level 6 catching up to him while causing an uncomfortable rumble to run through his lower intestine. He walked quickly towards his bathroom, only to still as he spotted the lacking weapon from the rack where it had been put when he had to cage Shiryu. No. Clack! The metal-like sound of a sea stone shackle closing on one of his fingers was the only warning he received, followed by a wave of debilitating weakness that announced the headsman's presence. Ryu, whose name meant thunderstorm, rumbled with approval as its edge bit skin, flesh, sinew, and bone, tearing through each of those with the same ease. Magellan's head rolled off his shoulders while his eyes glazed over, and as he died, he didn't notice that it hadn't been Shiryu the one responsible for the sneak attack. Coby had closed the sea stone around the warden's finger, and a split second later, once the hands of the pink-haired pirate were free, his shadow had cut with the speed that only intangible things could possess, the 3 meters long Notaki appropriate to its size. Ryu was a very long Notaki with a quadrangular guard, while the handle was red with a diamond pattern. And as his shadow sheathed it once more, Coby couldn't help but grin. The first half of its sheath was white, while the second half was red. The pink-haired escapee took a moment to admire it before returning it to his shadow, which gleefully put it away in the endless folds that composed it. Convenient, aren't you? His doppelganger gave out one of its silent laughs and skittered over the walls and the floor, objects being strewn about as anything of interest was placed on the main desk that dominated the room. Coby was left with the less grateful task of looking for the passepartout that Magellan owned, knowing about its existence thanks to Shiryu's knowledge, but he soon found it. Once he was done with his task, he retrieved the Devil Fruit Encyclopedia and flicked through it, stopping on the marked pages that matched the 5 awakened Zoans present in Impel Down, only to grin unashamedly, plans over plans taking shape in his head. After all, he had to now organize a way that would all but guarantee the survival of his whole crew, instead of only Luffy. I can't believe it. It was truly unbelievable. Suddenly, the possible fear that there was someone capable of seeing the future among the enemy's forces was swallowed by sheer disbelief. His whole crew was coming for him. Luffy had ordered the Roaring Nova to turn back, exploiting Robin's general knowledge of the Grand Line, in order to use the Marines' triangle of strongholds against them. For Coby, the captain had put on hold his adventure. Maybe it's not so unbelievable. A softer smile spread on his features as he felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through him. Never before had his effects on the world been more manifest. Not because Luffy was willing to storm Impel Down, but because he decided to go back. To stop his sprint towards the One Piece, in order to try and save Coby. Someone who shouldn't have been there at all, was now the reason why the entire story was being turned on its ear. With Magellan gone, and the security system under control, Coby began to move at his newly found top speed, using his disbelievingly powerful body to push Saru past its limits. It wasn't that he was able to kick the ground more than 10 times in the blink of an eye, merely. Each of those kicks packed that much more of a punch. Before long, Mr. 3 had been taken from his cell, and whisked away through the shadows. There were many prisoners to free, after all. Buggy the Clown had been many things in his life, from cabin boy on the greatest pirate ship to ever roam the seas, to unwilling eater of a devil fruit, to proud captain who sandbagged his way in the East Blue. And, more recently, prisoner. It wasn't that he couldn't escape. Apparently, nobody had considered checking a bounty of 15 million belly for a devil fruit power. He simply didn't truly know what to do once he managed to get out. He wasn't an idiot. Leaving one level just to be recaptured with his ace in the sleeve revealed was tantamount to suicide. So he waited, biding his time. And when the wave capable of carrying him back under the unbound skies and the endless seas came, he jumped on it despite the fucking terrifying people leading it. A pink-haired man of 2 meters of height ran ahead of the group, his shadow stretching forward unnaturally, as if crawling on the floor. To his right stood the imposing figure of Jinbi himself, while on the left he had a purple-haired man clad in a fuchsia leather leotard that accentuated all the parts that Buggy would have preferred to not focus on. They had busted out of the inferior level at the head of a more or less organized army of Okama, which was followed by a frenzied or panicked mess of prisoners from every level. Buggy could tell from the way that the wounds and the tiredness sat differently on each of them, that there was something truly odd about them. They were out of their cells, Magellan had yet to make an apparition, and the guards at the inferior levels had been clearly taken out as everyone climbed upwards. Then why were those faces portraying equally elation and fear? The answer came too soon, and it chilled Buggy to the bone. Magellan is dead. The wardens are dead. The bestial guards are dead. The Bulgari and the soldiers are dead. Here's the good news. Buggy recognized someone conning a large number of people when he saw one, and that was exactly what was going on. While the voice of the man finished ringing in Impel Down, a shadow stretched in front of his cell, and with a burst of mocking, silent laughter opened the cage, only to follow up by opening the shackles of everyone inside. There is a massive hole in level 6. The prison is filling with water. If you don't want to drown, we must reach the surface. There, we'll take over the Marines' warships, and sail to freedom. And here's the bad news. The prisoners behind the pink-haired man let out a thunderous shout that was echoed by one of the recently freed prisoners while Buggy maneuvered himself to hover just off to the side of the charging madman. Their eyes meeting for a fraction of a second while a shadowy tendril tauntingly slipped over the clown's throat. Freezing where he stood, Buggy tilted his head, only to witness his own shadow tilting his head mockingly before shaking a finger, mimicking a no-no motion. Buggy the Clown swallowed hollowly, and followed the indications of his shadow, which brought him next to the man leading the charge. I know that you're good at swindling idiots. The voice of the man came unhurried. After taking the warships, the only possible destination is Marineford, where Whitebeard is going to war to save one of his. Do what you have to in order to throw the meat into that grinder, and those who survive will follow you. There are some competent folks here, you know? Buggy opened his mouth to protest the familiarity with which he was being addressed, the gall behind the nature of such a request, and to voice his general contrary nature at following orders, when the pink-haired pirate grinned, "Do that? And I'll avoid mentioning to the first Marine we meet of a pair of cabin boys on the Oro Jackson." And just like that, the outrage Buggy had felt mounting had its legs cut off by fear. The Straw Hats had arrived at Impel Down to find the gates wide open, and a small felt of warships sailing black flags waiting for them. The usual white noise of the sea was drowned out by the bloodthirsty shouts of the inmates that felt their occasion of reprisal was near, while zombies wearing the uniforms of the prison skittered about. Those that had been medics did their best to turn those incapable of it into people fight-worthy. The vast reserves of food had been made available for everyone, along with weapons of every kind. Before they could fully come to terms with everything that they were observing, a shadow fell onto the deck of the Roaring Nova, and Coby casually walked out of it, an undead seagull flapping its wings in order to land on the bulwark to his right while he greeted everyone. The whole thing had taken place in a matter of seconds, and yet the surprise of everyone in witnessing the clever use of his devil fruit was pushed aside in favor of the elation felt in seeing him hale and healthy. Coby was dressed with black trousers tucked into tall leather boots, and carried a large, white coat made for a man much bigger than him over his shoulders. Bare-chested, the shadows writhing between him and the cloth hanging on his shoulders seemed deeper than what they should have been, and if one listened or observed carefully, they'd be able to guess that there was a small army tucked in there. "Where's Ace?" Luffy's question was peremptory, heavy, and it hovered on the air almost like a thundercloud. It had come only after the enthusiastic greetings, but it had come nonetheless. Coby grimaced openly, but dutifully answered, "He was being taken to Marineford for his execution while I chatted with you on the transponder snail." "Why didn't you save him?" "Good reasons." Coby summed up the context of his decision, and even Luffy accepted it, not only because of the trust in his first mate, but because it made sense. "We set sail immediately, I'll explain on the way." "We're going to save Ace?" The captain had only one question, and the answer was short and to the point. "Yes." As the roaring Nova began to turn, Coby dropped a bag containing several devil fruits and yet another adjourned encyclopedia about them. "I have figured out how to cheat with my devil fruit. If we want to survive, we're going to need it." And as he spoke, he lifted a hand from one of the folds of his overcoat and quickly braided together several shadows. "These are from weak-willed swordswomen and City, the girl who was in charge of the awakened Zoans in the prison. Lola, you'll need to eat these, hold on to what makes you yourself, and everything will be fine." "Is that what you did?" The roaring Nova crossed the opened gates of justice at the head of the small fleet of warships, and Robin's question revealed the depth of her insight. "Is this the cause of your changed body?" "My appearance is a little sacrifice for the strength needed to protect my crew." Coby shrugged while he handed over the braided shadows to his wife. "Your body is likely stronger than the combined might of theirs. You'll just gain in terms of skills, but from the swords you carry. An intimate understanding of how animals work can only help." Lola accepted the shadows with a heavy breath. Per of her wanted to rebel at the thought of doing something so similar to what Mama routinely performed in Tato Land. Only for her memory to turn towards a brief conversation she had shared with Chopper a few days before the assault on an ice lobby. "If it is to protect the crew, I'll gladly become a monster." The ship of the Straw Hat soared ahead of the others while Coby made his rounds among the crew. "Usopp, these are hand-picked engineers, poison experts, and a few others, but try to use your power on them to extract the knowledge." And then spit them out. The writhing mess of shadows landed in the hands of the sniper without a fuss, and a determined glint appeared in the eyes of the long-nosed pirate. "Chopper, there were awakened Zoans in the prison." The pink-haired first mate lifted a single towering shadow from the mass that laid compressed under his coat, "but they were mindless. My suggestion is to eat a rumble ball. Pick a form that you don't mind giving up in the worst-case scenario. And evolve with the shadow you'll eat, but you are the expert, so I'll leave that up to you. If you can figure it out and then help Mary with hers, it will significantly increase our chances." "Coby, what is this about?" Zoro's annoyed voice cut the first mate's stride as he handed out power UPS like they were candies. "Everyone trained every day since you were taken. We're all much. This isn't going to be an adventure on a dangerous island." Coby spoke seriously to the now shorter swordsman. "We're sailing into open war. There will be no duel without cheap shots from the surroundings, no reprieve until Ace is away from Marineford. As we're now, only me and Luffy stand a chance." "Coby." The irritation in the green-haired man was warring with his hesitation. While it had never been voiced out loud, everyone on the ship knew that despite his role, the pink-haired pirate wasn't the strongest next to Luffy. While he had been rowing mightier and mightier, he was far from. Coby vanished. "If I had used a knife, I'd have killed everyone." The 2 meters tall, the pink-haired man reappeared next to Luffy with a red marker in his hand. "Check your necks." To the disbelief of everyone, each had a red mark on their necks, right on the carotid artery. In the silence that followed, Coby's voice rang like thunder, "If you don't allow me to stack the deck in our favor, and if you refuse to avoid the first lines, we'll be walking to our deaths. Understood now?" My shadow ate one of the shadows of an awakened Zoan, crocodiles, and a few others that piqued its interest. Everyone was hanging from his lips as he explained his line of reasoning. "Frankly, I don't think there is a limit to what my shadow can do. But eating all the guards wouldn't stack up to that much. Quality over quantity is a better bet. I ate a single shadow, and I was left in a coma for 2 weeks, because my old body couldn't keep up with the power ingested. Those with bodies capable of handling the strain, namely Chopper, Mary, and Luffy, will eat these awakened Zoan's shadows. Resilience, strength, they will skyrocket as long as you can hold onto what makes you, yourselves. I've already explained the selected ones for Usopp and Lola." Quickly, Coby walked to Brook, handing over another tight knot of shadows. "Swordsmen that I found unable to contribute to our rescue mission, try to use your music to chant them into following you. Possess them with your fruit just like you possess your bones. I don't know, but I suggest you try." Luffy accepted without question the towering shadow of the awakened rhino that had once been a guard of Impel Down. As he ate it, his body ballooned outwards, muscles folding onto flesh while he gritted his teeth. "Sanji, can you prepare a meal with a lot of nutrients that will be digested before we arrive at Marineford? I think it will help. What about those without freakish bodies capable of changing that much?" Makita asked as she pointed at the captain, who now stood not unlike a sumo wrestler, looming at 5 meters of height over a first mate that frowned thoughtfully. "Big size means big target," he spoke clearly. "Try to compress the rubber you're made of." "I dunno, swallow it down some more?" Luffy grimaced, but seemed to get what Coby was hinting at, and while he contracted all of his muscles, he seemed to squeeze himself to a smaller stature, even if his skin looked as tense as drum skin. He repeated the process until he was back to his former size, even if his skin still looked uncomfortably tense. Closing and opening his fists, the captain of the Straw Hat Pirates gave a slow nod, and squeezed himself further. "I'm hungry." Sanji simply shook his head in disbelief and walked into the galley, on it. As for the others, Coby grabbed everyone's attention while Chopper in Brainpoint made endless calculations in a small book and Lola still studied the braided shadow she had been given. "Your bodies can't handle the strain in a meaningful timeline. But nothing stops me from sticking guards into your shadows." "Guards?" The relieved voice of Nami was followed by a knowing smile from Coby. "I have several hundred of those," he grinned widely. "While they won't be able to improve your fighting abilities, they'll take every mundane wound they can before dying. Of course, the less you're hit, the better." And with those words, Coby stuck a long column of shadows into Nami's one, which writhed and ballooned out before settling down into a regular shape appropriate for the orange-haired, slim woman. Even so, the shadow looked far darker than what the environment around would suggest, and the navigator had the faintest feel of having countless creatures watching from over her shoulder. But if that was the price necessary for a bit of security, she'd take it. "I do have the shadows of some interesting critters besides the awakened Zoans." Coby spoke idly, "But from my experiments, not just everyone can remain sane with a bloodthirsty beast watching from beyond the corner of their eyes." "Your experiments?" Robin's voice was incredibly sweet as she immediately caught on the likely horrible things Coby had done to guarantee the safety of his crew, of his family. "I would have hardly proposed stuff to you in this order without being sure of the possible results." The first mate smiled only to turn towards the captain, who was sitting on the figurehead of the roaring Nova with determination rolling off him in waves. "I only hope it will be enough." And with the next chapter, we get started with Marineford. Given that I have no idea of the time stretches relative to travel among islands, I've been careful to avoid mentioning the specific timeline. Frankly, the option of having the rescue from the prison succeed did come to me, but avoiding Marineford would have been such a letdown, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So maybe I was a bit ham-fisted in having Coby's recovery time coincide with Ace leaving the prison, but letting him more time to prepare would have slowed down the pacing. And it would have raised the question of why the fuck didn't the MC put together enough shadows to build an engine to have Ace bring everyone away? The answer to that would have been plot railroading, and while it's more or less the same as me having Coby wake up too late to rescue Firefist, it's much less obvious. Maybe I'll write an extra chapter in which the saving actually takes place, cutting away Marineford entirely, but it will be after I'm done setting up everything pre-New World. So, a lot to take in here, and like the rest of the FIC, it's pretty rushed. We'll see the effects of Coby's bullshit powers in the next chapter, but I hope I managed to make the brief recounting of his plans interesting. Of course, he had his shadow eat crocodiles before killing everyone he could in level 6, and then flooding Impel down to push everyone to follow him, while cutting off Blackbeard's shopping spree. As always, opinions, hopes. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you liked it, subscribe to my channel for more fanfictions like this, and goodbye.